Hi, hello, and welcome everybody to today's podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name's James Hempsell, and I have the job of chairing today's podcast, which is a conversation between me and Charlotte Stockton from the Department for Education. And our focus today is to discuss the upcoming changes to the EYFS. So I'd like to welcome Charlotte. Hello, Charlotte.
Hi, James. Hi, everyone.
And we're going to look at what's coming up with the changes and what we can expect from those. So off you go.
Thanks, James. So, hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Charlotte Stockton, and I head up the earliest foundation stage implementation team here at DFE. As you'll likely be aware, over summer 2023, the department consulted on a broad range of proposals which were intended to offer early years providers increased flexibility and make the EYFS easier to navigate and implement. Those proposals are now the upcoming changes and are coming to force in 2024. Today, we'll be explaining exactly what that means for the sector and for practitioners. Um, so, Before James and I jump into conversation, I'll give a brief overview of why the department has launched the consultation they did back in May around the EYFS. So, in the government spring budget, the Chancellor announced the single biggest investment in childcare ever made in England. These reforms mean that this government will invest £204 million in 2023-24 to uplift the rates for existing entitlements, rising to £288 million in 2024-25, with further uplifts later too. By 2027-28, the government expects to be spending over £8 billion every year on early years entitlements. The department wants to work closely with the sector to ensure early years providers are ready and able to offer these new entitlements. One way the department wanted to explore supporting the sector was through the proposals in the EYFS consultation, which aim to give early years providers increased flexibility and make the framework easier to navigate and implement. Most of the regulatory changes in the consultation were suggested by early years providers to make it easier for their settings to utilise their workforce, take decisions that are right for their settings and the children within them, and help increase the capacity ahead of the rollout of the new entitlements from April 2024. First of all, I wanted to thank you for your input into the consultation, which received 2,659 responses. Alongside the consultation, we also carried out a provider survey to assess the likely impact if proposals went ahead, based on whether people felt like they would make use of the different proposals. This provider survey was carried out by EYFS Research and received 1,349 responses. This information from both the consultation and the provider survey helped us reach a well-informed decision to build the package of EYFS changes published in the recent consultation response. In this response, we announced that ministers have decided to implement a number of changes to the EYFS from January 2024. Most of the proposals consulted on will be brought in subject to parliamentary approval. We want providers and local authorities to be aware of all the changes and consider how they may bring the benefits to the setting. The changes being made include removing the requirement for Level 3 practitioners to hold a Level 2 maths qualification and creating provider-specific versions of the EYFS. We'll go into more detail on each of the changes being made to the EYFS later in this conversation. However, for now, I wanted to flag that ministers have decided that the department will not be reducing the percentage of Level 2 qualified staff required per ratio or changing qualification requirements outside of peak hours. Ministers believe the package of changes we want to speak to you about today will provide settings with much needed flexibilities, and we hope these changes will make it easier for providers to operate successfully and allow practitioners to focus on providing children with the care they need in a high quality early education environment while also giving practitioners opportunities to progress their careers.
Okay, well done. You've given us the background and the context there. So let's unravel some of those bits and bobs and look at them in a little bit more detail. Recruitment and retention is something that people are talking a lot about, as you are aware. So it's certainly a live issue. And in fact, I'm doing a session this week on that very subject. So let's think about steps that are being taken to encourage people to join the sector.
Absolutely. So we understand that recruitment and retention of qualified staff is a key issue for the early years sector, and driving up interest in early years careers and ensuring that there are enough opportunities for career development is a priority for the government. We're developing a range of workforce initiatives and removing barriers to entering the sector by ensuring qualifications are suitable and easy to understand. This includes through the introduction of earlier skills boot camps, which we launched a competition for over summer and will include a pathway to an accelerated level 3 early years apprenticeship. We are also considering new degree apprenticeship routes so everyone from junior staff to senior leaders can easily move into a career in the sector. On top of this, we have taken action to boost workforce numbers by collaborating with the Department for Work and Pensions and the Careers and Enterprise Company to promote the importance and value of a career in the early years. And we'll launch a new national campaign early next year to support the recruitment and retention of talented staff.
And I know there's a lot of interest in the department's emerging plans for that national campaign at the beginning of 2024. So we await with interest what good news that will bring and what support will be there for the sector. So thanks for referencing that. Let's think about going back to the EYFS changes, because of course much of the EYFS changes are there to support the workforce. So we've talked about the campaign in early 2024. Let's think about other changes and when those will be implemented. So what are the sort of timescales happening around these changes? And I think I'll change your, I think you've got a slide, so I can change the slide for you. There you go.
Absolutely. Thanks, James. So the department is aiming to bring most of these changes into force for January 2024. By bringing in these changes from the consultation in early 2024, we'll be giving the sector some time to use the proposed flexibilities and ensure they are ready for the new entitlements in April. However, it is important to note that most of the changes being implemented are in fact changes to minimum requirements, providing flexibilities. So this means that most of the changes are optional, so long as settings meet the minimum requirements. And settings can decide whether it is right and helpful for them to implement the changes in their settings. As ever, settings should think about what is needed to meet the needs of children in their care. For more information and to see previous communications by the department on these changes, viewers can visit the Foundation Years website, where they can watch a recording of a Foundation Years live event that we did a few weeks ago now, and where several colleagues at that event spoke to these changes at length.
Yeah, and it really is a great resource, the Foundation Years website and the newsletter and the news flashes. And presumably, those of you that are watching this podcast have accessed the podcast through those routes. But I would really encourage everybody to spread the word and pass it on, that if you're not already signed up for the Foundation Years newsletter, that you do so, and encourage others to do that. It's not just for leaders and managers, it's for practitioners, it's for people thinking about joining the early years workforce, and for people with roles that support it. So we're very keen to broaden and widen and increase the subscribers to the free Foundation Years newsletter. So a little plug there. But let's move on to think about what those changes might look like then. So Charlotte, what do the EYFS changes look like in a little bit more detail?
Yes, so like I just said, and subject to parliamentary procedure, these changes that I'm going to speak about now will be coming into force in January. So the changes were designed to improve flexibility for early years providers and make the EYFS a more usable document, so providers can focus on delivering high quality provision. There will be two separate frameworks, one for childminders and one for group and school-based providers. So the requirements for each provider type differ slightly. Let's go through what this looks like in practice. So on your screen now, you should be able to see the changes that are going to come in for all provider types, so all early years practitioners, whether they work as a childminder or in a group or school-based setting. The changes that apply to all practitioners include the creation of the two separate frameworks, so the one for childminders and the one for group and school-based providers for the EYFS. A change to wording on English as additional language, so the EAL requirement is changing from a must to a may. There's also a change to the language around collection of physical evidence. The requirement is remaining to be the same, that you're not expected to collect physical evidence, but we're just strengthening that to increase that message. And there's also a change to a safeguarding requirement to include not just mobile phones and laptops, but also other electronic devices with the imaging and sharing capabilities within your safeguarding policies. And now popping up on your screen, you'll hopefully see some changes that apply to childminders only. So these include the removal of the requirement for childminders to complete EYFS training before registration. However, they are continuing to be required to have the same knowledge and understanding of the EYFS, which will be tested as it currently is at a pre-registration visit by Ofsted or their CMA. They also allow childminders assistants to hold the role of key person going forward and allow kitchens to be considered within the floor space requirements. We'll be moving the early learning goals, the ELGs, from the childminder EYFS into an annex of that document and significantly amending the section on the early years foundation stage profile in the childminder EYFS. And this also includes removing the section on the reception baseline assessment, as this assessment is never carried out in childminding settings. We'll also be providing further information on safeguarding responsibilities when childminders are working in a group, including a change around the child protection language there. There's also been a change to the wording about suitable people and a change to the wording on confidential areas for childminders. So on that one, it's recognizing that you might not always have an area for conversations with parents available, but you can always make one available. So recognizing that childminders might not have a dedicated room for that in their house, but as long as they can make that space when needed, it's no problem. We'll also be removing the requirement for childminders to display PFA certificates physically in their homes, and instead they can have to be able to make these available on request. And similarly, rather than requiring childminders to display a copy of their certificate of registration in a physical manner, they can now display this digitally and again make it available on request. And then finally, I'm going to talk through some changes which apply to group and school-based providers, which again, you'll see on your screen now. So these are the changes that will apply to only group and school-based providers, which includes introducing a new statutory document on early years qualification requirements and standards, removing the requirement for level 3 practitioners to hold a level 2 maths qualification to count within staff-child ratios, and instead place this requirement on managers, allowing students and apprentices to count within staff-child ratios at the level below their level of study, where it's judged to be appropriate, clarifying that while qualifications must be verified, employees don't need to provide physical copies of their qualifications, recognising that many of these are digital and provided online now. And finally, clarifying some of the wording on the validity of PFA certificates.
Thanks for taking us through that detail, Charlotte. And it occurs to me, how many of those are sensible updates given how the world's moved on. You talked about digitalization, and it's also about how childminders, thinking about the childminder slide, how childminders use their houses and what houses are like now. I was actually quite surprised that kitchen areas weren't included in the the registrable size of a childminder practice. So I learned that, but it's been nice to see those things be updated to recognise how people live and
Absolutely.
work. So,
Absolutely.
and having recently just joined a new organisation, and they've been checking my training and qualifications, and then asking me to do training that actually to participate in training that I've actually experienced in delivering. So it's like, well, actually, so that accreditation and that sort of understanding about what people hold and what they bring to a role is much better than requiring them to jump through an unnecessary hoop. So I welcomed that one professionally myself. So anyway, I must press on. Let's think about the changes coming to force at a later date then?
Yes. So after being received positively, there are also a number of changes that the department intends to also make in the longer term to first allow time to work with the sector to understand how to best deliver these changes. So these are introducing an experience-based route to working in ratios and making further clarifications around existing level 6 staff-child ratio requirements. And further information on these changes, including when they'll come into force, will follow in due course.
Okay, so I know that you want to take the opportunity to delve into those in a little bit more detail, and ask some think about the questions that some people viewing today's podcast will have on the maths changes. You know, what will be the impact of removing level 2, for example, for early years practitioners? I know people can see the benefit, but also sometimes can see a contradiction there. So it's like, how does that settle, and why is it sensible? Let's have a think about that one.
Absolutely, yeah. I think a really important question there, James, that we have already been hearing a few times, so keen to speak to that.
Mhm.
So practitioners are currently required to hold a level 2 maths qualification in addition to their early years level 3 qualification to work within the ratios. This means that someone can qualify as a level 3 early years practitioner and educator, but still be unable to work within ratios at that level and progress their career if they do not have the maths qualification. So this change will enable all level 3 practitioners to use their skills and experience to their full potential while giving settings necessary flexibility to deliver the transformative childcare and entitlements which were announced at spring budget.
So let's go back to that thing, I was talking about not having to do training for something that actually you could argue is an experience and a skill and a qualification that you have. Let's just um, focus down on that why do childminders now not need to undertake training to deliver the EYFS anymore, and what that nuance and that change is.
We want prospective childminders to gain the required understanding of the EYFS in the way that best suits them and their needs. We know that some applicants will have existing knowledge, such as from previous careers in nurseries or perhaps as a childminder's assistant, or they might prefer independent learning to undertaking a course. The requirement for applicants to demonstrate that they understand and can implement the EYFS will continue to be tested in the same way at the pre-registration visit. Through this change, the department is simply providing more flexibility around how they can acquire this knowledge. Childminders will continue to be required to undertake training in child protection and paediatric first aid, and will still be able to undertake the EYFS training if they need to or if they wish to, if that's the way that they best learn. So yeah, it's just a flexibility around how the knowledge is gained.
Okay, brilliant. Now, I mean, really enjoyed the debate and the discussion and the engagement that we've had with practitioners and leaders and managers about all of these changes. And there's been a strong strand of people talking about, well, how do we ensure that these changes add to practice and don't have a negative effect on disadvantaged or least advantaged children or children with SEND? So, what how can we reassure or assure those people with those concerns or ideas and thoughts? What's useful to for us to ensure that these changes are beneficial and don't have a negative effect?
Yes, so we really recognise the important role that the earlier sector plays in early identification of needs, to ensure that the right support is put in place for children as early as possible, and in reducing the impact that that might have in the long term. Early intervention can allow children to thrive, and we're committed to ensuring the right supports can be put in place as soon as it is needed. The EYFS states that all early years providers must have arrangements in place to support children with SEND, and when a provider identifies a child as having SEND, they must work in partnership with parents to establish the support that that child needs. Maintain schools, maintain nursery schools, and all providers who are funded by the local authority to deliver early education places must have regard to the SEND code of practice as well. Providers offering group provision are expected to identify a member of staff to act as SENCO. So that's the Special Educational Needs Coordinator. Um, and the department is currently funding training for up to 7,000 SENCOs working in group-based provision or as childminders. which will result in an accredited Level 3 EY Senko qualification. And that training became available in October 2022 and will run up until August next year, 2024. So that's just some of the ways that the department is continuing to support children with SEND alongside these changes.
Okay, thank you. And an aligned issue was English as an additional language, wasn't it? And we noticed that that was flagged as an area for improvement in the 2021 reforms evaluation. And similarly, that there's been discussion and debate about the changes that are being made in January. Um, well, the one argument could be that they have the potential to weaken provision in this area. So, what's the rationale for making that change, and what assurances do you have for people who might have that concern to allay their fears?
So, firstly, to clarify, the EAL change is a change to the requirement to support the development of home languages other than English within a setting from a must to a may. This does not change the requirement to give children with EAL the education and care that they need to thrive and to be ready for school. The aim of this change, however, is to alleviate what could be a difficult ask for some providers, especially if multiple home languages are represented by children in a setting. The change could also allow settings to spend more time on focusing on the acquisition of English, and there is evidence that the longer a child with EAL spends in an English based language setting, the stronger their fluency and competency with English becomes. The department consulted on whether this requirement should change from a must to a should or a may in both new versions of the EYFS. And changing the wording to may was the preferred option from consultation respondents. Also, data from the provider survey suggests that in most instances, providers would still choose to facilitate the use of children's home languages regardless. This change will offer flexibilities to providers who could struggle to meet the existing requirement due to the makeup of their staff and the children they care for, while still making clear that the EYFS providers can identify opportunities for children's home languages to feature in their play and learning.
I think for me, this is one of the things that really highlights that providers are very, very diverse in working in very diverse communities. And to offer that flexibility or applicability, I think is really important. Sometimes we can work in a setting and sometimes feel that all settings are the same, but they really are not. And it's a strength of our sector, its diversity. It's also one of our biggest challenges. So that's really interesting to me. Okay, so we've talked about many of the changes that are being put into place from the consultation, but there are some proposals that aren't being taken forward. So let's focus on those next. And I can see you've got a slide on that.
Thanks, James. Yes, so the department will not be reducing the percentage of level 2 qualified staff required per ratio or changing the qualification requirements outside of peak hours. We do thank the sector for their feedback on these proposals, which ministers carefully considered to come to this decision.
Okay, so talk a little bit then about how these changes relate to the 2021 reforms. Crikey, we're about to start 2024. So we're 2.5 years on already. Let's think about how those all relate. And I think you've got a slide on that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and absolutely crazy that we're already thinking 2.5 years on from the 2021 reforms. But before speaking a bit more in detail about those, I'll start out by saying that the January 2024 changes do not undo changes made to the EYFS in 2021, and there are no significant changes being made to the educational requirements in Section 1 or 2 of the EYFS, as was the focus from the 2021 reforms. As you'll likely know, the aims of the 2021 reforms were improving early years outcomes for all children, and particularly disadvantaged children, by focusing on the critical areas that build the foundations for later success, such as mathematics, language development, and literacy. The reforms also aim to reduce unnecessary assessment paperwork for practitioners and teachers so they can spend more valuable classroom time supporting children through rich curriculum activities. Alongside statutory changes to the EYFS framework, the reforms also encourage changes in practice within settings to strengthen curriculum planning, teaching, assessment, which was at the core of the reforms, really. The upcoming changes build on the three changes to the EYFS framework, which came into force in September 2023, more than changes that are going to be made. Sorry. Um, so the upcoming changes build on the three changes to the EYFS framework, which came into force in September 2023, rather than going back on any of the changes made in 2021. So the changes that came in force in 2023 is a change to the 2-year-old ratios, childminder ratio flexibilities, and a clarification on the wording for supervision whilst eating.
And again, we've had
Mhm.
sessions on those, haven't we? And those recorded detail in more depth if people wanted to have a look at that.
Absolutely, a very good point there, James. So yeah, if people want to remind themselves of what those are about, I definitely recommend checking out some of our other podcasts. Just thinking a little more about the 2021 reforms, however, alongside the consultation response, then the department also published an evaluation of the 2021 reforms that focused on strengthening teaching in the early years and improving outcomes for children. So this was an independent report by IFF Research, and it shows that many settings and practitioners have benefited from the 2021 changes, which in turn is seen to be having a positive impact on children. So some key findings from that report included that the majority of leaders and staff thought the 2021 EYFS reforms have had or will have a positive effect on children's learning and development. Leaders also generally thought that the 2021 EYFS reforms had improved the quality of teaching, and the majority of settings reviewed and/or made changes to their curriculum and assessment approaches as a result of the EYFS reforms in 2021. Most commonly, this included putting less focus on observation and tracking and spending more time with children instead, which was a key focus of the reform, so really great to see. And finally, to flag in this area, then many leaders also thought the reforms were leading to better quality interactions with children.
Okay, I can see the next slide's popped up, and that's about where people can go for more support or further resources. Sometimes it's great to hear somebody like you talk through it, but sometimes people need to be able to access the resources and the written word as well. So, where can people go?
Absolutely. So the upcoming changes, and indeed all of the changes that are ever made to the OFS and just the general content of it, is supported through a programme of communication and engagement led by the department and, in fact, my team, hence why I'm here today, which starts with discussions such as this one. We have been and will continue to work with the sector and with local authorities to ensure that they understand the upcoming changes being made to the OFS, including where flexibilities are offered and how they can best implement the changes. So, like you said, James, one great way of engaging with us is through this platform, Foundation Years. So, if you aren't registered, then please do get yourself signed up for the newsletter, as by registering, you'll receive monthly newsletters, news flashes, and information of events being held, and also further podcasts like this one. So, do take some time to look through the website and engage with existing content as well. As James said, there's lots up there, and it might answer some questions or queries that you have. We also have our Help for Early Years Providers site, which provides guidance for people working in the early years sector. And again, you can sign up via that website to receive alerts when new guidance is added. And then I think there is a second, there we go, brilliant. You can also access some additional resources on the EYFS by following the links on the screen. So you can see that's the EYFS consultation and also the reforms evaluation that I've been speaking about.
Thank you. So that was a packed half an hour or so, I think. Thanks very much for taking the time to talk us through those changes. Really good to hear about the consultation response and the decisions made after that, and spreading the words around what's going to happen when and what might be coming up next. So thanks very much for that, Charlotte, and to your team as well for putting all of that into practice. So
Thank
I
you for
think we
having me.
both I think we both plugged foundation years enough, but but I would encourage people to sign up and to encourage colleagues to sign up as well, so that they can get good quality, authentic information via the department on what's happening. And it's always very useful to have a credible source of information. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
See you. Bye bye.